So today we're introducing our slave cylinder setup tools. And what we have here are setup tools for C5 and C6 Corvette, as well as your traditional Tremec mounting flange that you typically see on an F-body GTO. The newer Magnums, they all have this style of interface between the bell housing and the front plate of the transmission. So what this will allow you to do is accurately measure for slave cylinder shim, which is crucial in the life of your clutch hydraulic system. It provides a more accurate measurement than the traditional methods that people have been using to do this install or to do these setups. So the first thing you're going to need is going to be a 9/16 and a 15mm wrench for tightening your hardware. You will need 2 of the bolts that would hold your transmission to the bell housing, as well as a caliper of some kind, whether it be a dial type or a digital like this. If you do not have one of these and you're a car guy, you need one of these. If you are a car guy, chances are you already have one of these. So the last thing you're going to need for this install is going to be a shim kit, like this one we have here. This is a kit that we manufacture. It comes with 5 different shims of varying thicknesses, and you have to have these for proper slave cylinder setup. This kit retails for $49.99, and like I say, it comes with 5 different shims. They're color coded and marked, so it's foolproof. So we're going to start with the front plate of the transmission. I've just got the front plate laying on a table here for the ease of this video. Normally this is going to be bolted to your transmission, sitting on a transmission jack, ready to go in the car. There'll be an input shaft, here. So the first thing we want to do, put our slave cylinder on. This is different for every slave cylinder, depending on what type you're using. If you have an F-body style like this one is, there's a spring on here. You're gonna pop this off just like that. Remove the spring, then you'll put this back on, and we're gonna make sure that this is fully seated on this base. In an F-body application, this will actually go down and touch the base. A Viper has a very similar slave cylinder to this as far as how it looks. It's a little longer. It won't go all the way down to the base. You need to make sure that that is all the way down as far as it'll go. That's the only way that you're going to get an accurate measurement. So we're going to start by just putting this on our front plate. Normally I would need my hardware if it were hanging on a transmission jack, but it's not, so we're just going to go with this. So I've got this arranged to where the top is facing me, just for ease of the video. You can see that the tool has an arrow cut into it rather, and that's to indicate this needs to point to the top. So we're going to start with our hardware and spacers, and we're going to insert these through this bottom hole, and we're going to insert another bolt through this top hole here. And these are pretty standard locations. Every transmission with this flange pattern has these 2 bolt holes. And then we're going to slip our spacers down over our bolts, just like this. Add our install tool. And as you can see, it's got a hole in the center for your input shaft to stick through. And so when your transmission's assembled, your input shaft will be sticking through this opening here. So we've got our slave cylinder all the way down on the surface of the front plate, bearing all the way down, and now we have a target point to measure from. And what this does is it gives us a known distance from the face of this flange down to the face of this bearing. Because from the face of this tool down to the face of the transmission front plate is 4.5 inches. Then you're going to use the tail side of your caliper, and you're just going to select one of these holes. And the nice thing about this is you'll see on the other side, measuring the actual pressure plate fingers themselves, these holes in these different locations really come in handy depending on what clutch you have and where your engine is situated as far as rotation. Another thing that it allows you to do is you can take multiple measurements and average it out across this face if it's not seated perfectly flat, because these things do have some rock to it when it's just sitting here unloaded. So anyway, we're going to take our tool, and I'm going to try to do this with the tool facing you guys. We're going to come down, measure to this face. I'm just going to do a couple more of these and see what we look like for an average. We're within a couple of thousandths, pretty much all the way around the bearing. Now we have a measurement of 2.559, and now we know we can take that distance and subtract it from our known value of 4.5 inches, and that will give us our current install height of the slave cylinder bearing itself. Okay, so on the bell housing side, we're going to have the clutch already bolted to the engine, bell housing also already bolted to the engine. Then you're going to install your tool. The bolt holes you use will be a mirror of the front plate bolts that you just used, and you're going to use 2 of your bolts that would normally fasten the transmission to the bell housing. This hole on a lot of bell housings is a blind hole, so we've stacked washers under this bolt to be able to get it tight. This hole here, I've never seen one that was a blind hole. I'm not saying that isn't out there, but again, just put the bolt through it, tighten it down, and now your tool is in place, and now we have another known distance to measure from. So with it set up like this, we've got all these extra holes. That way you have at least a couple of fingers that line up with the target plate. So same as before, you're going to take the tail of your caliper and you're going to stick it down through one of these holes, and you're going to measure to the finger. And again, you can take a couple of different measurements and average it out if you feel necessary. So the measurement that we're seeing right now is 2.51. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that number 2.51 and subtract the known distance of 1/4 of an inch, so 0.250. And that gives us a measured depth from the face of the bell housing to the pressure plate fingers of 2.26. So we're going to take the 2.26 measurement from this side, and we're going to subtract the 1.941 from the transmission side, and that gives us a measured distance of 319 thousandths. Can you see that? So what we're looking for is a measurement of around 150 to 200 thousandths of an inch, so 0.15 to 0.200. And in order to achieve that target window, you're going to shim your slave cylinder using one of these shims. In the case of this, being that it's 310 away, I would probably just use the 125, and that's going to get you down under that 200 number, and that would set you up nicely. So back on your transmission side, you can remove your slave cylinder, and obviously if this had a input shaft, you would just slide this down over the input shaft. You're going to line your 2 bolts up into the openings, and then install your slave cylinder back. And that's how you actually install the shim. Now, depending on what type of car you have, some of these bolts are bigger on the Dodges. These shims are made to accommodate the bigger bolts. Also, I guess a lot of people don't know this, but you can stack these shims. Let's say you needed 165 worth of shim. Well, you can take the 125 and the 40 and just stack them both together, and that gives you the 165 that you need. Now there is a limit to this because you only have so much before you run out of register on the front plate itself. These 2 shims, you can see I still have the register, but there is a limit to it. Now, if you get to the point where you're past that limit of the register, you probably need to start looking into, hey, maybe why is it doing this? Just check over everything and make sure everything's installed correctly. I have personally never needed more than 180 thousandths, 190 thousandths of shim before to get in that window. So I feel like anything over 200 might be getting extreme, and there might be something else wrong that you need to look into.
Have you ever spaced the bell housing, or would you ever recommend doing that?
I have had to space a bell housing before. I don't recommend that because that gets into things like the transmission mount not lining up. Your drive shaft length is wrong. There's a lot of negatives that come with having to do something like that, and I try to avoid that at all costs.
Are there alternatives? Like, can you run a smaller slave or anything like that?
Yeah, so you can get adjustable slaves. I think a Tilton setup would be a little shorter in height, and it would give you a little room back versus having to space things out to gain that room. And but again, like I say, I've only seen that once or twice ever, so it's not something that would be common.